Thank you for being here to open your heart and let God speak to you this morning. This is an incredible text that I am looking forward to sharing with you because it teaches all of us so much in what we need to know, learn, and understand. Let me begin by asking a couple questions. Now, we know if we take a common thing like a weed killer that it was developed to destroy weeds, right? Weed killers destroy weeds. What about antibiotics? Weren't they developed to destroy viruses? Isn't that right? It's right. But I want to ask this question. Do we know and have we accepted that sin destroys relationship with God and others? It is very serious. It is very powerful. It is impactful. But we live in a culture today that says, embrace a little sin. A little sin's okay. Everybody sins some. And we have this kind of casual approach to sin. But I want us to see today that sin is very dangerous, sin is very powerful, and that sin literally destroys relationship with God and others. We'll learn this from the interaction between God, Cain, and Abel as we study these 12 verses out of Genesis chapter 4. And I've entitled the message, Sin Destroys Relationship with God and Others. Now, this is a very well-known story. Even to those who do not read the Bible very much or know very much about the Bible, they seem to know this story. It is the first murder in human history. Cain kills Abel. Now, there's a very common saying that people use when people are being troublemakers or getting into trouble. They say what? They say people are raising Cain. Have you ever used that? Maybe you've gone to the restaurant raising Cain. That's a very common set of terms that people use to say you're living wild or reckless or you're living evil. You're raising Cain. So the world kind of understands this, but have we made the connection of how dangerous sin really is? This is a very troubling and tragic story from beginning to end. It's interesting to me to look in Genesis 3 where we have studied and see that sin was against God, where Adam and Eve broke the command. It was directly against God. But here in Genesis 4, the sin is against another person, Cain against Abel, out of anger toward God. That's really the issue here. He did not bring an acceptable sacrifice. And he became angry with God that God wouldn't accept his sacrifice. So we're going to learn that offerings and worship that we bring is connected directly to our relationship with God and how that's going. And for Cain, it wasn't going well. There are several things we're going to see here today, 6 in fact, as we break this down and take a look. So I want to begin with the first of the 6, and it's simply this. We were made for relationship with God. This is verses 1 through 3. And I want to read this and just make some points here about this so we understand the gravity of what's going on between man and God. It says, verse 1, Adam lay with his wife Eve. She became pregnant, gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Now in these 3 verses, really what I want us to see is simply this. There are 4 relationship factors connecting man and God together. The first is simply this. And these aren't, they're just kind of right there, but they make the point that God and man are connected relationally. The first is the fruitful factor. Adam and Eve are obeying God's will for their lives. When it says Adam lay with his wife Eve and she became pregnant, gave birth to Cain, they are fulfilling Genesis 1:28, where he told them and called them to be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. So they are simply doing what God has asked them to do. It is the fruitful factor. Then you see the dependence factor. This is relationship dependence on Eve's part as she declares, with the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to Abel and then even Seth later on, but we can make the assumption that in each and every one of these, there was a dependence upon God in the giving of the birth to these children and bringing them into the world, the dependence factor. Then you see the work factor. There we find that Cain and Abel are working. They're fulfilling God's call to work. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. God has made us to work, and we see that in their working, where it says in verse 2, now Abel keeps flocks and Cain worked the soil, we see that they are fulfilling God's call on their life to work. And it is a relationship factor there that they're doing what God asked them to do. But the main one that sticks out to us that we'll focus on in our text today is the worship factor. We as human beings were made to worship. And it says this in verse 3, in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. This is worship. They had a certain place, a certain time, and understood acceptable means of worship. And Cain brings this offering to the Lord to worship Him. And so this is the worship factor. And so in all four of these, the fruitful factor, dependence factor, the work factor, the worship factor, it just simply helps establish the fact that man is relating to, obeying, hearing, doing what God wants them to do. And they're drawn to Him. They want to worship Him. And the same is true for us today. We have this drawing to our Creator. And we want to fulfill what He has for us. But there is a struggle in it, because sin has a role and can pull us away and destroy that relationship, and we're going to see that. But this here in the first part is we were made for relationship with God. Now, secondly, I want us to see that God, if the relationship is there, and it is, but God sets the terms for the relationship. This comes out of verse 4 through the first part of 5, and it says this, but Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, He did not look with favor. So we see this division. We see that one's right, one's wrong. Something's going on here. God looked with favor on Abel's offering and not Cain's. We could say it like this: God accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's offering. And the real question that we need to answer is this: why was that? Why did God do that? Why did He accept one and reject the other? Well, the Bible doesn't really say specifically exactly what the technicality of those things are, the specifics. The offerings obviously were different. We see that. But in the end, what we know is Abel got it right, Cain got it wrong. But some of the differences would simply be this: Cain brought some fruit of the ground, Abel brought a blood sacrifice and offered the best of the best, the fat portions of the firstborn. We're just breaking this down. Now, had God given them instructions about the importance of blood sacrifice, as we would learn later in time about that? We don't know specifically. The Bible doesn't say. We can kind of speculate that we would think so, but we don't know so. It's impossible because Scripture's silent on this point. But that's not really the point. The point is simply this: that whatever the worship instructions were that were given to both of these brothers, one got it right, one got it wrong. Abel obeyed, Cain disobeyed. That's the key. Hebrews 11:4 is a good cross-reference for you to write down and look at. Let me read this to you because it's what makes it clear what the central issue was all about. Verse 4 of Hebrews 11 says this: by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offering, and by faith he still speaks even though he is dead. This is the great chapter of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, and it's acknowledging that Abel heard the instructions, took them into his heart, and by faith believed them and acted upon whatever those instructions were that God gave him. And it says by faith he brought the better offering. Now obviously Cain, through the same process, had received instruction, but there is a disconnect in what he heard and what he did, and God would ultimately reject his offering. So this is very important to see that the key is simply this: obedience produced the faith. Obedience produced the faith. It was a heart and a faith issue. Abel had faith. Cain didn't have faith. Abel believed God and offered the best that he had. And what did Cain do? He did not believe God and apparently just went through the motions, meaning he did not give his best. I thought about myself in that regard and thought back to school. And, Michelle teaches middle school. I probably would have been the worst student she'd ever had because when I was in middle school, I just had the, tendency to want to get by. Any of y'all like that in middle school? Oh, I saw some people pointing fingers at other people. Oh, my. Middle school, high school, whatever school, sometimes we have that tendency, right? We don't give our best. We just want to get by. And we get good at getting by instead of just learning the material, doing the right thing. You put forth just as much energy in the end. But I wanted to get by. Later in high school, I finally decided to make that turn and do the right thing, right? And start really doing my work. And I made that turn. But in middle school, I learned how to get by. And I really think, I know that's a very simple illustration, but I really think that's what Cain was doing. He was just kind of getting by. He didn't bring the best. He didn't apply everything he knew he's supposed to. And that's a very dangerous thing to do. But that seems to be exactly what Cain was doing. Can I ask you a question? What kind of offering is God asking of us? If He asked for an offering of Cain and Abel early on, and they had this desire to be drawn into His presence at a certain time, certain place, with a certain type of offering that would allow them to worship God, don't you think the same is true for us today? And it is. And if you look in Romans 12, 1 and 2, you begin to see that for us, what we are called to bring is a living sacrifice. Let me read it to you. He says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." Now, we can look back at Cain and Abel and say that was way back then, and that's what they did back then. But what about now today? And the answer is we are to come with the totality of who we are. That means how we think, how we live, how we interact with God. All of it matters. You cannot segment your life and say, I give this part to God and I give this part to what I want. You can't set the terms. You can't say, I'll do it my way and expect God to accept it. We've got to come on God's terms. And if we are to bring a sacrifice, if we are to bring an offering to Him, if we are to connect with Him in worship, what He says to us in the New Testament is simply this: bring it all. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. It's all of who you are. Yes. That's what it means to be a living sacrifice. I have to ask myself, what type of living sacrifice or act of worship am I presenting to God today, each and every day? It's a question we should be asking. He's looking for people who will, by faith, obey His word, respond in faith. That's what matters. So, we see we were made for a relationship with God. We see that, listen, God sets the terms for the relationship, not us. But thirdly, what we'll see now in the second part of verse 5 is this, is that Cain wanted his way in the relationship. Wanting my way in the relationship. Look at what it says. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast, which was an evidence of what was going on in his heart. This anger and the downcast face revealing the heart. His lack of faith is seen in this angry reaction to God's rejection of His offering. It's interesting to me that Cain is so interested in wanting God's approval. And I think we're that way as well. We want God's approval. We want God to be connected to us. But the problem happens when we want it on our terms. It's a form of trying to be God. to know better than God, to think we're wiser than God, to say to God, listen, I'm going to do it this way and I expect you to accept it, is to say, I know better than you. And that's really what Cain's doing here, and he's very angry about it. Instead of trying to understand what the problem was, of why the offering was rejected, Cain takes a different approach. He becomes very angry. It's interesting that it's not just he's angry. The Scripture says he's very angry with God, and he's in danger. Let me give you some of the reasons of why they believe Cain may have been angry. These are all speculating on the context, but they are things that may give us clues to his anger. One is simply this. Maybe Cain was angry because all of his efforts would count for nothing with God. All of his working of the land, the bringing forth of the fruit, all that he had planned, all that he thought that was better than what God asked him to do. Maybe he's just mad about it, right? What about the fact that he could be angry that he thought in his mind what was acceptable would not be acceptable to God? And he's angry about it. I've been angry before. How about you with God? Because things didn't work out the way I wanted them to work out, or the way I thought they should work out. Cain's struggling here. And they really believe, most scholars believe, the anger that he had was directed toward Abel because he felt as though Abel was going to replace him as the firstborn, his privilege and his rule. And that may have very well been true. This may very well why he planned to take him out and remove him. But whatever is causing us to be angry with God, we should let it go. Because I'll tell you this, in the long run, we lose every time. And all anger with other people can be traced back to an anger with God. You have to peel back the layers. You may have to look very deeply. But when you pull it all back and you take a look at it, ultimately in life, if I'm angry with somebody else, it's because I'm angry with God. I can't either accept something He's called me to, who I am, what I'm supposed to do, what didn't happen that I thought should have happened. And I may take it out on someone else, but ultimately it is a reflection of my anger with God. That's why I said in Genesis 3, the sin was against God, Adam and Eve against God. But here in chapter 4, it is against another person because they're upset with God. And how dangerous that is. Can I ask you a question? Are you upset with someone else? Are you angry with someone else? Do you have moments of anger toward others that flash up, rise up in your life? Things that set you off? Would you take for a moment and just think about that? Will you pull back the layers and say, is this really more of a fact that I'm angry with God about something in my life? It's worth taking a look. It's what Cain should have done. It's what God is going to try to get him to do in the next couple of verses. Let's look at the fourth point. It's time for a relationship evaluation. Verse 6 in the first part of 7. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" Here we have 3 questions, and each are designed for Cain to take an opportunity to look deep within. But Cain is so angry, we're going to see that not even God can redirect him toward obedience. Very, very sad. And sometimes we're that way. But watch how God in His grace addresses him. Watch how God poses these questions. And each of these questions are an opportunity for a spiritual exercise for Cain to reflect upon his life and determine where the problem is. It's designed to help him find the root cause. If you can get to the root and you can make sure that you deal with that, then you can be in right relationship with God and right relationship with other people. See, God knew the answer. These are rhetorical questions. He wants Cain to engage the questions. He wants Cain to answer the questions. He is calling Cain to face his sin. Now, that's not popular. But let me tell you something. That is the only way to find relief. That is the only way to get in right relationship with God, is to deal with whatever has divided our relationship with God, and it is sin. We would rather cover it than deal with it. We would rather ignore it than have to face it. But I want to say to you, if God is working in your life and He's pulling back the layers, He's asking the appropriate questions, don't put Him off. Don't put Him off. He asked him, why are you angry? What a great question. I've had moments of anger in my life. I'm probably sure that you have as well. And when you stop and you say, well, why am I angry? Why am I upset? What is going on? What a great question. It's just a simple why. And when you trace it back, what you find is we're mad about something we can't have immediately, or we can't have it our way, or things didn't go our way, whatever it is. If you're there, release it to God. Say, God, I'm sorry for being angry. I want to trust you. I want to do it your way. But see, that takes humility. You've got to break your pride. You've got to come and you've got to say, Lord, I can't do this. You must. Oh, my. Do you know that's the love of God to call us to deal with sin like He's asking Cain to do? But the devil will whisper in your ear, and I'll know. You stay in control. You don't have to go there. But oh, don't we? Look at verse 7. God calls Cain to basic obedience. He calls him to basic obedience. He says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Isn't that it? Isn't that it? It is. See, this is a genuine offer by God to Cain to make things right. Bring the right sacrifice. Just do the right thing, right? And what is true for Cain is true for us. God gives us opportunity to make things right with Him. These are questions of grace. These are questions of mercy. These are questions of spiritual opportunity to get right with Him. Don't brush God off. Don't push Him past and over to the side with a heart of rebellion. Respond and do what is right. You say, well, that's not a big deal if I don't. It's not a big deal. I mean, come on. You're just being super spiritual here and thinking you got to deal with every little thing and whatever. And, this is just too much. You sound more like my parents. Some people say that. Whatever. Let me tell you something. God knows best. Because what happens is this: when we brush God off and we push Him aside and we hold on to our anger and rebellion and we want it our way, here's what happens. The second part of verse 7. Sin wants to destroy my relationship with God. Verse 7, the second part says this. But, okay, it's one or the other. But if you do not do what is right. Let me tell you, Cain, if you don't do what's right, guess what? Sin is crouching at your door. S-I-N, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. Sin desires the human heart. It's looking for it. It wants to possess it. It wants to control your heart. But every human being has the ability to master it. When you and I disobey God like Cain will do here, we open the door for sin to enter. It is the flip side of obedience, meaning here's what happens if we choose to disobey. And at the moment we disobey those questions of grace, those questions of mercy, and we choose not to pull back the layers and get to the root cause of all the sin and all the anger, what happens is this: sin's waiting. It's crouching at the door. It is a figure of speech like an animal waiting to pounce on its prey. And that's what sin is doing. It's ready to take over Cain's heart. Now, are you one of those people that like to hide in the shadows and scare your loved ones to death? They come around a corner and there you are, and you just like to get them. Every once in a while I like to do that. How many of you like to do that? Isn't that fun? You got to be careful as people get older. You don't want to give them heart attacks and they die right in front of you. It'd be terrible. But it is fun to do that from time to time. And you get behind a door, you find a spot, and you know they're coming, and they don't know that you're there. And what are you doing? You're crouching. You're waiting. And you're going to what? You're going to get them, right? Now that's fun. That's innocent. I get that. But think about it like this. If that's sin, so you can relate to that because when we do that, we're out to get someone and they don't know we're there. And that's fun and that's funny. But let me tell you something. What sin's waiting to do is not fun nor funny. It's serious business. And it is crouching and it is waiting to destroy your life. But we live in a culture that says, oh, sin, go have a little fun. The Bible says it's fun for a season, but then it brings death. Oh, everybody's doing it. Doing what? Rebelling against God and allowing sin to come in to destroy and control your life? Sin desires to control and destroy Cain. But Cain has the ability to master sin. So what you see here is this ongoing struggle for humanity forever between good and evil, and this battle that transpires. Cain, he's a prime target. He's filled with envy and anger. And sin knows, can control and destroy his life. And when sin mastered him, let me tell you what happened. It took him to places he never thought he would go. And that's how it happens, and that's how it works. Don't discount the power of small sins. Some of us think we can play with small sins and get away with it, but you can't. The one look always leads to more looks. The one decision always leads to more decisions. Feed your flesh once, it'll demand to be fed again. You just can't do it. Small sins always lead to bigger sins. Cain did not think in the beginning that he was going to murder his brother. A news feed came across my screen this week as I was working on this message. And it said 2 FBI agents have been killed in Miami. Caught my attention. I opened up and I looked at it. And you probably saw it as well in the news this week. And I read the sad story, how these agents who had been working on a case in regards to child pornography were going to issue a warrant, seize a computer. They went to a house early one morning there in Miami this past week, and when they came to the door, a man on the other end with a long gun began to fire at them. And in doing so, 2 agents lost their life. Others were wounded. It was a tragedy now in the history for the FBI. And I sat there and I thought about that. This man, whoever this man was, and they called his name, I don't have that written down. You can go look that up. But whoever this man was, somewhere in his life, he made a decision, more than likely in a private setting, where he looked at something he probably should not have looked at. He fed his flesh in a way he should not have, in a terrible way, things we can't even understand. But he did those things. And the result of sin in that man's life has left a trail that is devastating. Even down to the point that we see the end result that 2 FBI agents lose their life. Their families are affected, right? This man had been abusing, supporting child pornography. Think of the families. Think of the children that have been impacted by this man's decisions. And then in the end, what does this man do? He turns and takes his own life. You want me to tell you who does that? The enemy. The one that came to steal, kill, and destroy. And we look back and say, oh, what a tragic thing. Police officers are in danger, and yes, they are. But let me tell you, the greatest danger we're all in is the fact that we have to make a choice in regards to sin. And ultimately, it comes back to even the choice before sin ever has its opportunity. It's our choice to choose to obey God. Because as we choose to obey God, sin has no platform. It can't crouch. It can't come. We're in protection and obedience to God. You can't play with sin and get away with it. We just live in a day of grace, and oftentimes the small sins don't immediately produce death, but death is coming. I want to plead with you. Listen, when sin is crouching at your door, do you hear the voice of God saying, turn away from sin and turn back and do the right thing? That's what God said to Cain. Cain, just do the right thing and you'll be good. Or do we press on in anger and allow sin now to master us? I want to say to you, beware of those hidden sins, that secret anger, that bitterness, those grudges, that jealousy. All of it is things that the enemy will use to destroy your life. James 1:13 and 15 put it this way: when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when? By his own evil desires. He's dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, listen, and sin, there's a process here, when it is full grown. There's a growth process in it. When it is full grown, it gives birth to death. You have been notified by the Word of God that sin leads to death when it's full grown. Don't let it master you. God said, don't let it master you. Choose not to allow sin to master you. Why? Why all that I am saying? Why all of this? Because in our sixth point, it comes down to this, is that sin will destroy my relationship with God and others. Watch this sad and tragic story and where it leads. Now, Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where's your brother Abel? Where's your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's keeper? The Lord said, what you have done, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crop for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Let's look at it. Sin, it leads to, first, blaming others. Cain blames Abel. And what does he do? He's really angry with God, but he's going to blame Abel. He invites him to go on a brotherly walk in the field. What do you think they're doing? Hey, Abel, let's go check the crops together. I want to show you what I've been growing. Oh, hey, Abel, let's go out and watch the sunset. Or was this just fellowship together? I don't know. I don't know what he said. But whatever it was a cover of deception with the desire to destroy is what it was. So he's blaming his brother Abel, and in his deception, he's going to attack him. Sin leads to attacking others. This is the ultimate attack. It is a premeditated attack. It is a sudden surprise attack. And here's what the Bible says: Cain kills Abel. It was premeditated murder in the first degree. It was brutal. It was bloody. This whole idea that murder will solve a problem comes from the evil one. I'll read this verse in just a moment, but the cross reference is 1 John 3:12. This is Satan convincing Cain the only solution was to remove his brother. Now that sin has entered and he's under the control of sin, Satan comes, and Satan, now in control, convinces Cain that murder is the answer. Remove your brother Abel. This is why they really believe that Cain was angry about the fact that he would lose his place in relationship to God, being the firstborn, the privilege, the responsibility, and all that came with it. Remove him. And then when God confronts this great sin, sin leads to lying to God. Cain is denying and deflecting. He denies responsibility. He lies to God. And then he deflects in verse 9, and he says, when he said, where's your brother? He says, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? What? What? See, sin leads to lying to God. And God knows it all. Sin cannot hide from God. He told him, he said, look, the ground is crying out to me with the blood of your brother. And then ultimately this whole thing leads down to this, is that there's consequences that come. Sin leads to consequences. Our relationship with God is affected. God came long to worship God. It didn't work out the way he wanted, but now where's his relationship with God? When God lovingly and graciously came to him and told him to do the right thing, gave him opportunity, asked him the right questions, he rejected that. Now what's the relationship? He's lying to God. What kind of relationship is that? He's disobeying God. What kind of relationship is that? Sin destroys relationship with God, and when it happens, the enemy says, yes, look what happened. See, sin leads to destroying relationship with God and then relationship with others. I can't imagine that Adam and Eve were happy with the choices that Cain made in regards to Abel. They weren't. It brought division, I promise. It changed his relationship with his parents. And then there are the personal consequences. The ground would not yield fruit like it had. He would become one who would roam the earth and move from one place to the next. Both, interestingly enough, Cain complained about both as being too severe. And then there's the long-term impact, generationally speaking. We know from studying his life that eventually he goes out and he forms a godless society. There's consequences. Listen to me. Listen, everyone. I'm speaking this to myself and I'm speaking it to you. There are consequences to sin. Here's the verse I was referring to, and I want to read it to you. 1 John 3:11-15 says this. This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. So we see that sin opened the door for Satan to come in. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, my brothers, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. Anyone who does not love remains in death, and anyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life in him. Serious. I mean, this is serious. This truly is a tragic story of the power of sin and how it leads to death. But one of the things that stands out to me in this text is how God dealt with Cain. He did not overlook Cain's sin, but in love, he confronts Cain's sin. God does not want to overlook my sin, but in his love, he comes to me and he confronts me about my sin. That's a loving God. He's trying to protect me from what's trying to destroy me. God's lovingly calls him to turn away from his sin and do the right thing. God does that in my life, and he's doing it in yours as well. He'll call you, say, hey, why are you so angry? Why are you so lustful? Why are you so envious? Why are you so gossipy? Why are you so whatever sin it is? Because he wants you to see that if you just do the right thing, you don't have to give sin control of your life. You can master it. And it all comes from his loving call to turn away from sin and do the right thing. But what did Cain do? I hate to report, but it is true. Cain rejects God's loving call. And I hate to acknowledge it, but it is here. The consequences come. And then grace upon grace upon grace. What does God do? We didn't read it, but it comes later in the text is that Cain is given a mark of protection, another act of grace, amazing grace, which spares him from the death penalty, allows him many years to live his life on the mercy of God. He didn't deserve it, but he got it. You and I, we both still have the opportunity to turn to God by faith, believing his word. And when we do, we'll be able to offer a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. I want to leave you with a scriptural principle and a story. The scriptural principle comes out of Galatians chapter 6. You don't have to believe it, but I'm telling you it's true. And here's how it goes. Verse 7, 6, 7. It says, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. The one who sows to please the sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. What is the principle? It's the sow and reap principle. We see it in Cain's life. Mark Buchanan, I was reading as he was talking about this particular verse, and he made some comments about it I thought were appropriate to close with. And here's what he said. He said, everyone sows one kind of seed or another. We either sow to please our sinful nature or we sow to please the Spirit. We cannot do both. Sowing to please the sinful nature means I cultivate those impulses that indulge myself and mock God. I treat lust as a flower, not a weed. I vent anger instead of controlling it. When a seed of greed or anger or gluttony or envy or fear and such like germinates, I tend it rather than pluck and burn it. And with those thoughts in mind, he said, I'm thinking of Charlie, a man that he knows. He said, Charlie creates a first impression of charm, wit, and strength. He stays fit, carries his good looks with confidence, but not arrogance. He's articulate and fair-minded and brilliant at what he does. He makes a lot of money and is generous with it. But, big transition, but Charlie has a problem with anger that's wrecked 2 marriages and is wrecking a 3rd. He's damaged his children almost, it appears, beyond recovery, pushing one into hard-hearted defiance, the other into stammering cowardness. He's turned friendships into vendettas, lost business deals over tantrums, sued neighbors over matters that could have been resolved with a good talk across the backyard fence. He's burnt more bridges than a Green Beret in Vietnam. He knows he's got a problem. And in his saner moments agrees he's got to get a handle on this. But whatever that means to him and whatever dark Freudian twist in his soul drives him, the results are already in. Charlie keeps sowing to his sin and reaping what he sows and storing what he reaps. And I wonder, when he dies, who will stand at his graveside and sing a sad goodbye? But stories like that spin the principle of reaping and sowing as bad news. There's a good news side to it as well. I can choose what I sow. I can choose because I have the Spirit to sow that which pleases the Spirit. I can nurture the little seedlings of the Spirit's prompting to be a man of peace, to be a man of gentleness, to be a man of self-control and of love and of the like. And so it is. We can choose to obey God. And when we choose to disobey God, we must master that sin. And if not, sin will come in and destroy our relationships with God and with others. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.